Hey guys, if you want to know how to build a competitive list for Detachment, which in my opinion can very well might be a more powerful gunline detachment than the Iron Storm, this video is for you. We're going to talk about the damage dealing units, both melee and shooting, support units, and how to structure a list for this new detachment. So without further ado, let's dive right in. And keep in mind, you don't need to play Dark Angels to utilize this detachment. You can run it for just your normal Space Marine gunline. Always, we're going to talk about the faction rules, my general thoughts about the faction as it pertains to this detachment, and also we're going to discuss all the damage dealing and support units, both melee and shooting. You really need to make your list very strong. Get a lot of powerful stuff in the detachment, and we are steered with this one. It's not an all-comers kind of Gladius type detachment where we get rules that benefit pretty much any unit. No, we are steered in a direction where we're going to be using our Deathwing units as the hammer that strikes the opponent, and the Ravenwing is going to be the anvil that supports that action. Surprisingly, Lion is excluded pretty much completely out of his own Lion's Blade detachment because he doesn't get either keywords of Ravenwing or Deathwing, which is sad, but believe me, the detachment is pretty good even without him. If you want to run Lion, go run the detachment of his brother Gilman, Gladius. This one is not for him. One of the first things to mention is the Ravenwing get 1 CP right through walls detachment, which really aids them in their support role, where their support role is essentially going to be throwing themselves carefully and deliberately under the legs of the opponent and making sure that the Deathwing hit as hard as possible. And here's how it works. So the Deathwing are going to add 2 to the charge rolls for their charges when they're charging a unit that has a Ravenwing unit that is in engagement range with them. So first you charge with a Ravenwing unit, and then you charge with your Deathwing. Plus 2 to the charge is not insignificant. It essentially brings your charges from more likely not to go off even with a reroll to almost guaranteed to go off with a reroll, and that is a big difference. I played the entirety of 9th edition using a Chaplain on bike with the Litany of... Not Litany of Hate, Canticle of Hate, yes. Canticle of Hate, which essentially gave the same thing, gave extra pile and consolidation and also plus 2 to the charge. And I rolled a lot of 7s, and 7 is a very reliable charge. It's not automatic, it's not like a 6-inch charge or a 5-inch charge the demon get, but it's still very reliable. You will sometimes fail it, but you can build your army strategy around it. Really do need that rule, because now that we don't get the advance and charge that we have from Gladius, and Gladius I think is the best detachment to run Dark Angels before this one was released, probably overall will still stay the favorable one for running Dark Angels just because how flexible it is, but still this one is pretty good. And now that we don't have advance and charge, the slower Terminators really need to be able to just get where they're going using either Rapid Ingress or just normal Deep Strike. Ravenwing units, as I've already said, are very important consumable resource here because they are usually fragile, so that's why they're consumable, and also you'll be exposing them sort of one at a time to activate certain buffs. So how effective you are with this detachment is going to depend on actually how well you can pilot your Ravenwing units in such a way that you can last with them throughout the game. Because honestly, the Ravenwing are significantly less efficient in terms of actually doing damage to your opponent than and staying alive at the same time than the Deathwing. So you want the maximum amount of Deathwing, but with that said, you still want enough activations of the Ravenwing buffs to make sure that even if something goes wrong and your opponent gets to one of your Ravenwing units before you get to use the buffs that you get from Ravenwing, you'll still have enough backup units to still activate your stratagems and the plus 2 to charge. Before we go into the stratagems, which is what makes the detachment so powerful, a word from the sponsor of this video, Adept Roll. So Adept Roll is essentially what's called a Warhammer calculator. Imagine we have a situation like this. We have an Armiger Warglaive and 4 Alaris Custodians, and we need to figure out how much damage will this squad do to the Warglaive. And we have weird questions like, do we need 4 models? Is 3 models enough? What happens if like Warglaive kills one on Overwatch or something like this? Should we choose the lethal hit scatter or the sustained hit scatter, considering these guys already have full rerolls to wound? And this is where the calculator, like Adept Roll, comes in. I'll show you the interface of the app briefly, because obviously there are so many features here and constantly new ones are added, so I cannot show you everything in one video, but in general this is what you will encounter when you download it, and it's free to download as well. You have your attacker profile at the top and the defender profile under it, and you have the option of downloading the profiles directly from Battlescribe by pressing the button on the top left here and choosing a gallery of all the factions, and all the profiles of those factions will be right there directly in the interface, and you just need to click view units, select the ones that you really want to add, like say Biologist Purifier, Blight Lord Terminators, and you click import selected units, and then you can go into the interface, and I've already preloaded the Alaris Custodians here. We'll add them. And here we have the spears, and we even have the modifiers for the spears, which is the reroll to wound against vehicles and monsters. We already have them inbuilt into the profile. I've changed it because initially it doesn't have it, obviously, because the weapon is not really carrying that modifier. It's the unit that carries it. But I decided that I want to have the twin linked added here, and I just go into modifiers, select twin linked, and it's gonna stay there if I want to save it as a part of this profile. And then we go to Defenders, we choose Armiger Warglaive, and then we just need to change the amount of attacks. Because we have 4 guys here in the squad, we will have 20 attacks, and we can give them whatever modifiers we want, and there are a lot of them here, as you can see. Now we can just press Process Results, and we'll get a result. We did not add any katas, which we obviously can add lethal hits and sustained hits, and we can see we have dead models here, failed saves and damage. The pink bar underneath shows the results without modifiers. We can also see the graphs of how many dead models we're gonna get, and like one dead model is about 61.5% chance of these 4 guys killing the Warglaive, and how many hits on the target they're gonna have. I highly recommend checking out the Adept Roll app because it is really useful. I use it on a daily basis. It's also very useful in a competitive scene where, for example, you have a break between the rounds, and you know your next opponent is going to have particular units. Say you're playing against Death Guard, and they have Death Shroud Terminators, which are extremely popular now, and you want to figure out how much damage you need to put from your unit into the Death Shroud to make sure they go down and they stay down. And this is something that you can do on the fly without rolling the dice and spending a lot of time. So I highly recommend it. Check out that roll. The link is going to be in the description. Thank you for your attention, guys, and we continue. Talking about stratagems, the one big thing why you really want to run this detachment is a stratagem that allows us to apply +1 to wound modifier on any enemy unit that has been shot by a Ravenwing unit. So imagine this. You have an Invader ATV. And this only works if the Invader ATV shoots from within 12 inches, which is not that big of a deal. The Ravenwing units are thankfully quite fast, and that's another reason why going through walls is useful, because sometimes, especially if you miscalculate your positioning or your opponent does something crazy in their turn, you may need to go directly towards the opponent to get within 12 inches instead of going around the ruin, which is what mounted units normally you need to do. So that Invader ATV gets within 12 inches, shoots the whatever thing, the monolith, for example, and that monolith is then +1 to wound for the entirety of your shooting phase, which is amazing. The reason why it's amazing is because all your Deathwing units will get the benefit. And I'm saying Deathwing, not Deathwing infantry, and that means Dreadnoughts. You know me, I cannot skip any detachment that makes my triple Redemptor shine, and this one makes them shine very brightly. Redemptors and the Ballistas Dreadnoughts are already pretty good units. They really want to have the +1 to wound, but they are without it already quite efficient. Redemptor's Macroplasma Incinerator is essentially one of the game's best guns in terms of overall efficiency against multiple target choices, in my opinion, if you have +1 to wound on it, because you will be wounding anything in the game on 4s, and then from down there, it's going to be 3s and 2s for everything that is toughness 8 or lower. Has incredibly high AP, AP4, and the perfect damage 3, which damage 3 is the damage characteristic that works against everything. If for some reason you need to shoot at something lighter than the damage 3 infantry, you can always just not overcharge, and then you'll still have AP3, and you don't even need to roll a hazardous test. Same applies to ballistas. They already have a rerolls to hit, which almost always are active. They are very cheap, and that's important because Deathwing and in general Dark Angels units are expensive, so you want to have more stuff, and ballistas allow you to have more stuff while still getting a very durable Dreadnought chassis that gets its own rerolls, and also with +1 to wound, the last cannons and the crack missiles become really significantly more dangerous. For our melee squads, such as Brutalis Dreadnought or Deathwing Knights, we just get a chance to actually get into combat much more quickly. The bonus that the Ravenwing gets here instead of the +2 to charges is forcing a desperate escape test on all the opponent's units when they try to fall back from them. So that's actually a very powerful thing, because if you are an invader ATV that just charged a tank in order to get your Deathwing Knights to charge the tank, and if the Deathwing Knights, for example, fail their charge or fail to kill the tank, you really don't want the tank to be able to just fall back from you, because then it's fall backing from you and then your invader ATV is dead. If the tank doesn't fall back from you, at least they'll be forced to shoot into combat, and some tanks have a number of blast cans which will be limited from shooting then. And so this is very useful. And also it's +1 to that Desperate Escape roll if the unit is already battle shocked. The powerful thing with the detachment is that we actually get a stratagem that forces a battle shock either in your command phase or at the start of the fight phase whenever you want to, and you can only use this once per battle round on an enemy unit. So say you have a tank that is in combat with an invader ATV and they want to, you think they will probably want to fall back from that. You will use that 1 CP stratagem, and then at -1 they'll have to pass a battle shock. If they fail, then they will again at +1 roll Desperate Escape test. So it's a dead tank on 1s, 2s, and 3s, and I'm really doubtful that someone's going to actually take that chance. Also, for 1 more CP, we get a better Heroic Intervention, so 2 command points. Essentially, it allows us to protect our Deathwing Knights and Deathwing units in general from being overrun by high OC small infantry units that like to steal objectives from us. So what used to happen is you have a Deathwing Knights unit on an objective, and then your opponent just sends a squad of OC2 infantry there. They will out OC you on the objective, but not charge you, because why would they? And now your turn starts, and then you have to go through that squad, and you've already lost the points for being on objective, even though you were there and the infantry unit was right in front of you. You lost those points, and now you have to spend the time clearing through that screen before you can actually get to something that your opponent doesn't want to lose. And this is very powerful because depending on how well you position your Deathwing Knights, it will require a lot of effort from your opponent to actually work around that. And this will tax their mind, which is always what we want. Lastly, we get a very powerful -1 to hit or -1 to wound stratagem, which -1 to wound for Deathwing units and -1 to hit for Ravenwing units. We cannot use that in conjunction with Armor of Contempt, but it's still very powerful for any kind of situation where we want to protect against something that is already very high AP, so Armor of Contempt would be useless. -1 to wound, though, is the conditional one where strength is higher than toughness, but in most cases that's exactly what we want, where we want to use the -1 to wound. Let's talk about the damage dealers for shooting in our lists. First is Ballistus Dreadnought. I sincerely think that even though Ballistus is not my favorite one in other detachments, here where he gets +1 to wound and at 130 points, it's pretty much an auto take, because why would you not run triple Ballistus for 390 points? Emptor Dreadnought is also amazing, as we just discussed. The Plasma Incinerator will get a huge benefit from the +1 to wound. Also, the Onslaught Gatling Cannon and the Icarus Rocket Pod are not bad when they get +1 to wound, so strength 5 will be wounding some lighter vehicles on 4s here, or 5s against anything else. The Icarus Rocket Pod is definitely going to be wounding everything on 4s, or maybe even 3s. Emptor is already a very survivable platform, and he fights reasonably well in combat. Fights well enough to at least keep people away from tagging it for free. That's kind of the level of melee that it has without the Liberator Assault Group buffs, in my opinion, but it's still not bad. So 8-inch moving Dreadnought with -1 damage, toughness 10, 2+ save, 12 wounds, and a wide array of guns is worth the price. Though I really hope that we're gonna get Redemptors at maybe 205 points or 200 points instead of 210. And Land Raider Redeemer also gets the Deathwing keyword, and it's pretty crazy, the combination you can get where you put 5 Deathwing Knights inside it, and your Assault Cannon, your Multi-Melt, and your Flamers get +1 to wound. And that's quite a dangerous combination. Also, a Land Raider that gets -1 to wound is also quite tough. It's rare that you're going to use that instead of the Armor of Contempt, because in most cases the -1 AP is what Land Raider wants, and it's already toughness 12, but there are some cases where the -1 to wound may be more useful. Hellblasters, the Azrael +10 Hellblasters is still a very valid combo, because what the Hellblasters need, in addition to the sustained hits 1 and 4+ invulnerable save that they get from Azrael, is some sort of buff to their shooting. In Gladius, it's going to be Fire Discipline with critical, sustain, and lethal 5s, and here is just +1 to wound with sustain from Azrael, and it's still very powerful. Don't even need to buy Lieutenant for them, though I would recommend it because the detachment doesn't have fallback and shoot and charge, so A lieutenant in this case is quite useful. And also the normal repulsor. I think the repulsor executioner still is better off in the Iron Storm because it wants the rerolls more than it wants the extra +1 to wound. And I'm really hopeful that they're going to give the repulsor executioner 7 seats as the impulsor, because it just doesn't make any sense that the huge tank has less seats than the small impulsor. But the repulsor, on the other hand, carries a lot of infantry, and you might want to use that exactly for the Azrael plus Hellblasters combo. And the repulsor itself has quite a lot of shooting that will benefit from the +1 to wound. For melee, we pretty much have our usual suspects here. Deathwing Knights are still amazing. You're still gonna run 2, maybe 3 units of them. I think 2 is the better option here, considering how many Dreadnoughts you want to run. Still, you want some of the infantry Deathwing Knights because they are amazing. 4 wounds, -1 damage, in addition to the Terminator stat line of toughness 5, 2+ save, and 4+ vulnerable save is amazing. Plus, to recharge from this detachment, you can really effectively use them coming from the reserves, either again from Rapid Ingress or the Deep Strike, depending on what the board state looks like, how many screen units your opponent has up. Because if they have a lot of the board covered, sometimes Deep Striking is not going to be an option, but Rapid Ingressing can be. Resurgent Companions are still a very dangerous unit. Despite them losing advance and charge here compared to the Gladius, they still are very powerful, and being able to stage them behind a wall and then charge out if your opponent puts a foot on an objective can be really dangerous. You still need the 4+ vulnerable save, so if you're running Azrael, you might consider running him with them, because then they actually get an ability to survive a turn and then go and fight against something else. Otherwise, they're just going to be cut down. 3 wounds with toughness 4 and 3+ save is just not going to last too long. Brutalis Dreadnought has now a great potential to actually make it into combat, especially with Rapid Ingress. With +2 to charges, it's a really serious threat, and I would really consider running at least 1 Dreadnought, 1 Brutalis Dreadnought in your lists. Great mortal wound potential with his own ability and tank shock, and his profile is quite universal. Extra attack actually is meaningful compared to Redemptor, and his sweep profile is very useful if you get stuck with some witches or Cabalites or something like that. Captain with Assault Intercessors is actually quite interesting in this detachment because there is an enhancement for +1 damage, and his Power Fist with damage 3 is a really dangerous devastating wound machine, which you're gonna do about 11 wounds with him with full rerolls to hit and wound that you get from Oath and the Assault Intercessors to a toughness 3, 3+ save tank. Oh, he almost one-shots a normal tank, and that is not bad for just 1 captain. The support category is actually extremely important for this list. First, Invader ATVs. You pretty much must have 2 or 3 of these in your list because they are the cheapest and most versatile for the purposes of this detachment option to get the Ravenwing buffs onto targets. Base 60 points for 8 wounds and toughness 5, which is not bad durability. It's not amazing, but it's definitely not bad, and they can survive a couple of activations of small arms fire. Next best thing to them are Storm Speeders. These are a bit more expensive, significantly more expensive, so less disposable. However, they actually apply a buff for your entire army, and gun lines do like such buffs. Best are Hammer Strike and Thunder Strike. Hammer Strike is the one that ignores cover for you, and you can imagine that for all of your guns, it's essentially like getting +1 AP, because nowadays everything gets cover, and ignore cover is really hard to find. So I highly recommend to run at least 1 Hammer Strike in your list, because this is going to make a big difference when you shoot at something, especially something like a 2+ save tank in cover. The Thunder Strike gives you +1 to wound, but it's significantly more expensive, 25 points more expensive, and it gives you +1 to wound against vehicles and monsters. So it's an overlap with the stratagem that you have. However, considering it's also a Ravenwing unit, and considering that you might want to shoot multiple targets against, say you get +1 to wound against something that is not monster and vehicle, and you dedicate some of your shooting there, and the rest of your shooting goes into a monster vehicle. If you are careful with this tactic, it can be a very powerful option as well, but I personally would still gravitate more towards the Hammer Strike. Just don't have a lot of spare points running the Dreadnought heavy list with Deathwing, so it's unlikely that you're going to have enough to fit both the Hammer Strike and Thunder Strike, and if you're choosing between them, definitely go for Hammer Strike. The standard package of Infiltrators, Scouts, Combi Weapon Lieutenants, Jump Bag Intercessors are still more than valid here. I'm not going to go too deep into why each of these units is important. We've discussed that a million times on the channel. Just safe to say, all of these are wonderful for our scoring purposes, one way or another. You want to have at least one unit on your home objective at all times, and it should be a 5-man unit so you can screen out your deployment zone efficiently. So like Combi Weapon Lieutenant could be your home objective unit, but it's very likely that he will lose that because he cannot cover enough area around himself to prevent deep strikes effectively. Infiltrators, on the other hand, are very effective at preventing deep strikes, however, they are expensive. Second unit you want to have is, again, at least one sort of like scoring/skirmish unit. It can be either Jump Back Intercessors, or if you don't really want the skirmish part, you want just the scoring, Combi Weapon Lieutenant is amazing for this role because he's very versatile. He's relatively durable for his 70 points with a 5-up shrug, stealth, and 4 wounds. Most importantly, he has the reactive move inbuilt, so you don't need to spend CPs. You don't even have the chance to spend CPs in this detachment, and you will be able to save his butt from some really awkward situations this way and get to activate him again and again. Next are Outriders. They are efficient enough on their own in other detachments. I just don't like the fact that they don't have any fighting capacity whatsoever. And gaining the Ravenwing keyword means that we can activate the buff for shooting with shooting of their bolters, charge after moving their 12 inches, or if they can even go through a wall and charge as well. So not a bad scoring unit for 80 points. They're pretty much worth it. Last but definitely not least is the Dark Shroud. It's an amazing buffing piece that I think is an auto take for Dreadnought heavy lists because A, it's still a Ravenwing choice. You probably will not be activating buffs with this one for a long time, at least until turn 3 probably, because you don't want to expose it, because it is a very powerful buff. It gives a 6-inch aura of stealth and cover. Cover doesn't really mean much unless you are running your Dreadnought completely in the open, then it will be useful. And the stealth is amazing. Just imagine Redemptors or Ballistas Dreadnoughts with a constant -1 to hit modifier, no matter which distance they are at from the shooting target. It is amazing. And the Dark Shroud has a 5+ vulnerable save. It's toughness 8, I think it's 10 wounds, so it's not an automatically easy to kill unit. Your opponent will have to do a lot to kill it, and with a 14-inch move it's really easy to hide it and then stage your Dreadnoughts around it so they all get -1 to hit. Here is a roster example for the Lion's Blade Task Force. I really like this list. I think it's pretty powerful. So we have a Tech Marine here, as we need at least one character, and this one is the cheapest and most applicable to the unit that we can run. We have 2 units of 5 Deathwing Knights with Maces of Absolution. We have a squad of 5 Scouts. These guys are going to be staying on a home objective. We have 2 Invader ATVs to activate our Ravenwing buffs. We have the Ravenwing Dark Shroud to give us the stealth for the Dreadnoughts. We have 3 Ballistas Dreadnoughts, 3 Redemptor Dreadnoughts, and a Stormspeeder Hammer Strike. So this list has probably one less Ravenwing unit that I would perfectly, in the perfect scenario, want to run. And technically, I guess you could swap one Scout squad into an Invader ATV and just park that Invader ATV at the back of your deployment zone. And at some point, if you really want to, and if the range is enough for you to move out and shoot and activate another turn of +1 to wound, you could do that. But honestly, if you are careful with how you are consuming your Invader ATVs, and your Hammer Strike, which you're gonna do it in this order: Invader ATVs, probably then the second turn Hammer Strike, then the Hammer Strike either dies or not dies. If it doesn't die, you activate your buffs again, and then lastly Invader ATV, and the most reserved thing you use is the Dark Shroud. That's how you expose your Ravenwing assets, I think, for this particular list. This list has a lot of shooting, 3 Redemptors, 3 Ballistas. Hammer Strike also shoots pretty well. The Invader ATVs have Meltas. It has quite a lot of melee, so 3 Redemptors are okay. 2 units of 5 Deathwing Knights are very powerful, and Ballistas can tank shock pretty reasonably well. Not charge them though, unless you really need to, because you cannot fall back and shoot, so be careful with how you position them. The reason why I think the Lion's Blade Detachment is more powerful than the Arian Storm Detachment for a Dreadnought gunline, the Dreadnought gunline, not a tank one, which it's two different things, is because the reroll to wound is just a more useful and a versatile buff. Even though it's not a detachment buff, it's a stratagem, but still, you only really need to kill one thing within one shooting phase, usually. And the other things that you need to kill don't usually require +1 to wound. So you need to focus fire one thing really well, and then other things can be dealt with incidental fire or charges, usually. Not always, but usually. And for Redemptor Dreadnought, it's useful to be able to reroll hit roll or wound roll, but usually Redemptor is going to be wounding tanks or monsters on 5s. So rerolling one wound roll, trying to get a 5 is not amazing. Instead, getting to wound for all of your shots on 4s, that's amazing. And why I think Dark Angels are amazing for this kind of Dreadnought gunline is because the Dark Shroud provides incredible durability that we otherwise don't get. Like, we can get stealth for Dreadnoughts in Vanguard, but it is conditional depending on the distance, and also the Vanguard doesn't have the buffs to shooting that we need to have for the gunline. So running multiple Dreadnoughts in Vanguard seems to be like half of a waste of our time. Here, however, it fits very, very nicely. I like the fact that it's not all Dreadnoughts, so we still get 2 units of 5 very powerful Terminators that can go through walls, that can stage behind walls, and utilize the countercharge stratagem effectively, and help us contest objectives without us going too close with the Dreadnoughts that don't really want to fight that much. Do let me know what you think about this one. I have mixed feelings. First, half part of my heart really loves the fact that Redemptors shine here. And you know me, I would run 6 Redemptors if I could run 6 Redemptors. I just love the Dreadnought so much. It's so versatile, universal, tough. That's just what I love in a Dreadnought. But I don't like the fact that the detachment doesn't have the level of versatility that we have in Gladius, and very few detachments actually have. So we don't have fallback and charge, we don't have advance and shoot, we don't have reactive moves here. So we don't have a lot of that toolkit stuff that I like to have in a detachment that I would say is very competitive. Still, buffs that I see here, if you learn how to play it carefully, if you learn how to position those Ravenwing units, how to feed them to your opponent at a pace that is more useful to you than it is easy for your opponent to counter, because believe me, they will go after those Ravenwing units when they learn how your detachment operates. If they know the game well, they will do it. If you learn all those details, you will be able to utilize it very effectively, and it can be an extremely powerful and tough detachment to play against. So thank you for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.